Testing. Testing. 1, 2. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Natalie from Art is in Cakes here in Little Rock, Arkansas. And today we are talking about different types of fondants and their different benefits, as well as possible pros and cons. We carry quite a few varieties here in our store, everything from Wilton, Basic Decorator Preferred Fondant. I carry Satin Ice. We have Renshaw now. Fondarific is one of my all-time favorites. We also have the new pre-sheeted fondant as well from DecoPac. So we're going to talk a little bit about all of these in just a few moments. All right, everyone. So today we're playing with fondant, different types of fondants, their benefits. Obviously, we carry a variety of different fondants, so each one has their specific use. And today we're unveiling the new pre-sheeted fondant. Super excited about that, taking all the work back out of it. So we have a little 6-inch round to play with, and we'll be covering it with fondants, playing with it, smoothing it, and then uncovering it and trying a different brand. All right. So I thought we would start off with Wilton's Decorator Preferred, and it is, you know, the beginnings of all fondants came from Wilton, right? And I have their chocolate here today. A little unveiling. And the first thing I noticed is, you know, it's going to require some kneading, but it feels a lot like Tootsie Roll. I'm going to split this so you can put your hands on it. And I'll have to find the rest of my tools. All right, there's a roller. You can use a bigger roller. It depends on the size of the cake that I'm playing with. There's that. And I do have some big old Mondo rollers if you prefer. And right now I'm just looking for my fondant smoothers that have a tendency to disappear. That's one of the joys of being live. It's like, I can't find this. Oh wait, I've got to find it. So the first thing I notice is I do have to knead it. It is somewhat like Tootsie Roll. It's obviously well packaged, but it doesn't have any dry spots, so I do like this as far as packaging. And the room's nice and warm today, so it should make it easier to knead. If you ever end up with a brick of fondant that you have to warm up, sometimes it's easier just to pop it in the microwave for 5 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Smells amazing.
Yes.
Really does smell like Tootsie Roll. It's awesome. Yeah. And it kneads fairly easily.
Mm-hmm. When you knead, is there a certain technique you have to do, like push your
You know,
palm in, or just anyway?
it just so happens I have a ceramics background.
Oh, okay.
So we've actually been taught to basically knead in a way that creates this conch shell. And we grab from the upper portion, reach down and push it down to the bottom of our wrist.
Oh, okay.
And as we do, we create this round effect. It's kind of cool that it pushes air bubbles out.
Yes.
So you get a smoother dough when you're finished. Or a smoother slab of clay. It's sticking a little bit to the stainless steel, but not too bad. How about you? I've got some pounces. They're called pounces. They're basically the little cornstarch filled baggies. There's one. I don't want to put too much cornstarch on if I can help it.
Right.
Because then it doesn't want to stick to the cake. Have you ever done that? Like, it's got so much cornstarch it refuses to stick. Sorry, Trevor, I'm all over the place. I'm going to give myself a little bit more room to move. I'm just going to set all this aside. We can use buttercream, ganache, or anything like that to make this stick to cake. In our case, we're going to use just a little bit of piping gel on a brush. So just some basic piping gel to put on the outside of our fondant to be covered styrofoam to give it something to adhere to. I'll never forget the first time I tried to cover a dummy cake and I couldn't make the fondant stick. I had no idea you were actually supposed to make it stick with something sticky.
Yeah.
Like what? It won't just stick naturally? And our goal is to get this about 1/4 of an inch thick. I may have to turn the air conditioner on. I'm actually hot.
It's getting warmer today than what it is this week.
When you are rolling your fondant to get an even, you're going to roll and then turn your dough. Roll and then turn your dough. And this allows you to put pressure equally distributed across the fondant. We all have a weak point. There's always some place where we're not able to put as much pressure. And for me, it's kind of this area right here, and I can always feel it. So if I turn it 1/4, then I get it with the other hand. And we have just enough to not quite cover a 6-inch. You and I split. So I'm going to focus on the front half of this guy. It stretches really nicely.
It really does.
So I have to be honest, this is the first time that I've used Wilton's chocolate fondant. And I'm kind of impressed. Trevor, do you want to be our official taste tester?
Sure.
He's sound so excited. What it is a sugar and gelatin and glycerin based product that then it's also called sugar paste in some countries. Okay. And it's a nice ultra smooth icing that covers a cake versus buttercream. So one of the things I always have trouble with is elephant skin or cracking.
I was just gonna say.
You got a little elephant skin? So this one actually did much better than some other brands that I play with. I am going to set this aside and see what happens if I delay putting it onto the cake a little bit. Because I know with my experience, I'm a little bit faster than most people. Yeah. So I'm going to give it a little bit of time to sit. In the meantime, I'm going to put a little bit of piping gel on the side, so I have something to adhere this to. And it's Kirsten?
Kirsten.
Have you fondant covered cakes in the past?
I've used Wilton before.
Yeah.
But that's it.
And it's the regular Wilton, not the chocolate?
Yeah, it's regular.
How does this compare?
I think it looks like very similar.
Good. So similar consistencies, even if it has the chocolate added.
Yeah, I think so.
So I now have this nice and thin. It is probably about 1/4 of an inch thick. And it's about that way all the way around. Except for the hunk that I cut off for Trevor because it was a big chunk, so I just moved it. Not too much cornstarch on the back side, so I can choose either side for the top of my cake. And you'll notice I'm using both hands to support this. If you're using larger pieces of fondant, you have to get arms, hands, everything underneath there, or else it wants to crack and split and stretch. But this one has a good firmness. Okay, so I'm already impressed. Like I said, I'm gonna cover like half of my cake because there's not quite enough fondant to reach all the way around. And I do notice immediately there is a little bit of cracking right here. So I'm getting a hint of elephant skin and cracking. And we all know the smaller cakes, smaller thin cakes are the hardest to actually cover and not wrinkle. So as I'm adding my fondant, I'm actually opening the bottom skirt. So this is where I stretch it. I pull it open slightly and widen that. And then I place my hand at the bottom. And most people want to stretch down, but you're actually going to up.
Oh, okay.
And then turning it slightly, stretching that bottom. And I'm just kind of tucking it up against that bottom edge and then up. Okay. So my smoothing happens in an upward motion. But what I find is I have to constantly turn it, lift it, spread it, and do it again. And up. But as I work my way around, I'm stretching the bottom, not the top edge, which is already slightly sensitive to being pulled. So all of my stretching happens here. And just like that, I worked out all of the wrinkles all the way around by doing the stretch at the bottom.
Okay. Should I put piping gel all over the cake?
I would say, yeah, you want it to stick. If you don't, you risk having an air bubble underneath there that just kind of hangs out and it moves. Okay. That fondant will move around. And we have 2 different types of styrofoam going on. Mine is a crisp top edge and yours is a rounded edge. I like the rounded edges, and that's what I learned on, was the rounded edges, because it gave me a little more, it was nicer to me. It didn't want to crack as easily. So having that rounded edge should make it a little bit easier to apply. And how do you feel about thickness?
I think it's maybe a little too thick.
A little too thick?
Yeah.
So you know what? Let me just move this over here out of your way, give you more workspace. And
Thank
you are welcome. And while you're rolling that out, I'm going to smooth a little bit and see about getting these crisp upper edges. I don't have a lot of air bubbles, which is fantastic. I'm going to focus on the upper edge. So a lot of people want to start down at the bottom, but we're actually going to start at the top edge and crisp that up. So I'm putting pressure right through here. And then after I have that well adhered, then I'm going to press down and press the fondant against the cake. But before I do any side smoothing, I'm actually going to cut off my excess. That way I'm not fighting these lumps and bumps. A lot of people want to try to smooth, and this gets in the way.
Yeah. Does that look good?
Yeah, it does. No pressure.
I'm just gonna focus on one side.
Okay.
So I wanna like pull out like a skirt.
Yeah. So you'll steadily just kind of, yeah, just like that, stretching that outer edge. And then go ahead and take your hand and press that part down. And yeah, start at the bottom and work your way up. You don't want to adhere it too much because we'll
Yes.
probably pull it off, create that skirt, push it back down.
So then right here.
Yep. And then I just kind of focus. So I'll grab here and I'll open this back up. It's almost like I'm steadily massaging that. Open and open and open. And I have a, go for it, Trevor. Hi, Trevor. I have a cool tool that I picked up, and I haven't had a chance to demonstrate it, but it's basically a angle, a top angle. For making those super top crisp edges. And it does nicely. At first, I was surprised because this guy is not a true 90-degree angle. He actually has a little bit of an open angle to it. And I was like, oh, I'm never gonna be able to get crisp edges that way. And then I realized it's not jabbing into the cake on this underside. So if it was a true 90, it would probably end up hitting the cake right in here and causing our fondant to snag. So they gave us a little bit of an opening. They made it a little bit easier for us. So Trevor, what did you think about flavor?
Well, I don't know if I've had it before, so I don't think they go well.
But
Is it not like most cakes?
most cakes are probably buttercream
Oh, okay.
in this area, but we do quite a few fondant covered cakes. Fondant has had a bad rap in that so many people felt like it tasted bad, but that was so many years ago. There have been so many improvements on flavor. But in the past, it was like, ooh, it's fondant. I'm just going to peel it off.
Oh, yeah, this is good. Like if it had cake under it, it wasn't like a fancy, like by itself.
And by itself, you're like, I wouldn't just eat it out of the bowl.
Yeah.
So this is a buffing technique learned. This is basically just a cake box. When we have really tall cakes, we have the lids that we have to cut off of our cake boxes. And it has the perfect matte finish. And because it's machine bent and scored, it makes the perfect crisp edge. So I look like a true professional by the time I'm done. I'm like, yeah. Nice. So I do like the way that it's smoothing for you.
It's hard.
It is hard. And you have a fondant smoother. You've got the edger, which is not going to do too much for that little bent edge. And then you might even try this and see what happens or how you feel about it. Yeah, and hand placement. You're going to basically place these two fingers here, and that's where your pressure goes.
Oh, okay, okay. Perfect.
Yeah, and it just gives it something to stick to. So that's fondant 1, and I'm impressed with workability. So as I continue to play with this, I'm really not suffering a lot of elephant skin. I've had some that within a few minutes, it's falling apart in my hands. And I kind of feel like the warmth of my hands, if I do get a hint of elephant skin, I can warm it up and basically buff it. So Wilton's a good one in my book. I'm just going to roll this up and do a different fondant now. That little bit of piping gel will not hurt a thing. Can be used for future practice. Good and squishy. Smells like Tootsie Roll. Definitely want to cover it with a little bit of saran wrap to keep it from The next one I wanted to work with is Satin Ice. It is also a wonderful cost-conscious fondant. It covers nicely and smoothly.
Can I wash my hands?
Yes, absolutely. And satin ice comes in a true white. It's really pretty. I have some more satin ice in there. I'm going to give you this whole thing. Does need to be kneaded. All fondants do. Smells a bit different. Maybe not quite as pleasing.
I like it a little better.
A little like Play-Doh for me. Yeah, a little like Play-Doh.
Yeah.
You can? Mm-hmm. So when I open it up, I can see a lot of air and pores. That is an indication that it needs to be kneaded. If I tried to roll this right now, it would break in those areas. So they all have to be kneaded. Bright red, just in time for Christmas. It kneads well. It's very similar to the Wilton in feeling. It's a little bit stickier. Like it's wanting to stick to my table a little bit more. And to my hand a little bit more. My ceramics teacher would be proud right now. Once you've got that nice and smooth, and I can tell by just kind of pulling on it, if I can open it up and it doesn't want to crack, then I've kneaded it enough, nice and smooth. And since this is sticky, I'm going to fondant, cornstarch both the top and the bottom of the fondant. And I'm probably going to have to reapply the cornstarch regularly. And by doing that quarter turn, it helps us get more of a square or pie shape. So we're not ending up with long flat pieces that we're trying to stretch across a round cake.
So we're aiming for a square shape?
No, it ends up being kind of squarish or more roundish. And to feel for thickness, I'll get both hands under here and literally feel, and I know I've got this thick area right here. So I'm going to back it up and roll just a little bit more. Still got a nice sticky surface from my first round of piping gel. So I'm just going to lift in place. Oh, and I already tore it. So I had a slightly thin spot right here, and it just ripped from the stresses. So I would end up re-kneading this, and instead of doing 1/4 of an inch, I'd probably go a little bit thicker with satin ice.
Okay.
because it doesn't seem to have as much stretch or give as the Wilton.
Okay.
So I'm going to open the skirt, place my hand, and just gently adhere it right at the bottom of the cake. I do that all the way around before I really start attaching it. And I've got a little bit of a weak spot developing right up there on that edge. It's interesting, this fondant was very sticky when I started, but I can feel it drying rapidly.
Yes.
The top surface is drying very fast.
I feel like this one's smoother.
Huh?
I feel like this one's smoother.
Yeah, I do too. And I'm having trouble sticking at the bottom. I'm going to fight this back side last, since that's where my hole was. And I'm going to do something a little bit different and create a seam. Since I actually broke it, I'll use scissors to cut it and smooth that area down. And then we'll create a little bit of paste from our fondant and fill that gap.
Okay.
So I'm going to come around on this side. So I'm definitely a righty. I could have done a little bit better there. I could have done better. So now that I have most of that around the edge, I'm going to go ahead and trim off my excess and look at it a little bit closer. I'm going to just press that up into place. Trim it a little bit closer to the edge. And now I start the smoothing process. I usually start on the very top. And so I'll give this a nice buffing and make sure I don't have any air bubbles hiding. And then, like I said, I always do this top edge and make sure it's adhered. And then I'll focus my attention on the sides. Switch to one of my cool edge tools and put some pressure right there on the edge so I get nice crisp top edge. I am loving this tool. Loving it. I wish there was a way to show off the before and after, but I have a nice 90-degree crisp edge. It is definitely drying fast, like wowzers, drying really fast. Since I have this rough spot back here, I'm going to smooth it a little bit first, and then I'm going to show you how to create a patch.
Okay.
So when I have super roughness, I can probably spend all day doing this, and it's not really going to do a lot. I like to take a ball of fondant and just literally create a little ball. Grab my fingers with it and dip it in the cornstarch and buff out that area with the soft fondant. And that reduces a lot of the little edges. So now we're a lot smoother. To create a patch, we're actually going to make a really gross looking paste out of our current fondant. And we want to do it the same day because the fondant will change color as it kind of sits. So if you're using colored fondant, you want to make that paste right away. So I am going to make a mushy ball by just adding squirts of water to it. It's gross looking. And it feels gross. And I'm going to use a spatula, preferably a tapered angled one. And I'm going to stucco this guy, put a little Bondo in it. So now you can see we've got this stuff that's like bad bubble gum. And just using my spatula, I'm going to fill in that hole. I'm going to come up just a little bit more. And I think part of the trick is not using too much in this area. So just enough to fill that space. Oops, I dented it. And undent. And then clean off the excess. And then I have a cool little piece of plastic. It's a flexi, like a flexi tool. I'm not gonna lie, guys, this came from a cheap cutting board set from the dollar store. And then I cut them into the pieces that I wanted. But I can get right up in here and just scrape up the sides. Oh, it's already starting to dry. Oh, it doesn't work as well on Satin Ice. Yeah, I'm not gonna keep doing that because I'm gonna mess it up. Wash this off my hands and then smooth that down. How's it going, Kirsten? With the back, the very back edge. So this comes from adhering here before fully developing our skirt.
Okay.
So I don't actually attach it until I have stretched in place, stretched in place, stretched in place.
Okay.
But it's a great opportunity to try the sponge or whatever they call it now. I'm going to put some cornstarch in here, and I'm going to do the same thing with my ball of fondant, and I'm going to buff it. This is much less noticeable on white. It's more noticeable on colors. So now I have smoothed that out. And I can come through with a little bit of airbrush and a little bit of vodka or Everclear and make those cornstarch lines go away. So then it'll look like it is smooth. All right, keep working at it. And then just chop off a section and try applying the sponge, paste, whatever we want to call it. And there's an angled one. So Satin Ice dries really fast. If you're working Satin Ice, you have to be able to go fast with it. So I don't know if I would recommend this for somebody who's new to fondant covering, because there's just no working time. So I use Everclear because it evaporates super fast, being the highest percentage of alcohol. You can do this with a brush, but it's a little bit more consistent with an airbrush. A few drops of Everclear, little test spritz. There we go. Whatever was clogging it is let go now. Not too much because you don't want it to melt. Just enough to get rid of that cornstarch line. And then that'll dry, and it'll dry matte finish again. Ready to try a different one? All right.
And what was in here, just water? Or
Just water. All right, Satin nice, dries really fast, have to work really fast. A little prone to cracking because it does dry up so fast. Like this it is very dry. If I were to try to work this, you can see all the little cracks starting to develop in there. Let's see if I can get closer. So that's called elephant skin. And that's what happens when the top surface dries too quickly and you're still trying to work it. It just slowly comes apart in little wrinkles. Elephant.
It's also really sticky.
It's not now. You want to try it? You don't want to be our taste tester? He doesn't want to taste the Play-Doh. You're like, no. That was very definitive. You guys heard that, right? He was like, nuh-uh. All right, so that's Satin Ice. And it's another example of elephant, how it just starts to wrinkle and crinkle. But it dries hard. So if you're doing a display cake and you want it to dry quickly and you want it to dry nice and firm and hard, this is probably perfect. All right, quick little ball. How are we doing on time? What time is it? Huh? Oof. It's so fast. All right, have you worked with Fondarific before? Fondarific, I love it because it has qualities similar to modeling chocolate and fondant combined. It has a really long work time, which is great if you're wanting to mess with the surface, like if you want to add texture or, yeah, and I've used it on my sculpted cakes. And it's fantastic for that. And I've used this in quite a few different demos. One of the first things people notice is that the Fondarific feels like a brick in here, and it's really hard to knead. But if you read the directions, it says microwave in short increments. So what I'm going to have you do is actually microwave this until it becomes the consistency. I'm going to take off a hunk for myself. It does not elephant skin. I actually like to roll it a little bit thicker than normal. So I have plenty of stretch, like it stretches, and if that's a quality you're looking for, it's perfect. So we do like 10 seconds at a time.
Okay. And you just leave it in the plastic? It's fine?
Yep.
Okay. And so then after 10 seconds?
Pull it out and see how it feels.
Getting a little squishy.
Yeah, and we don't necessarily want squishy.
Yeah.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah.
So if you can take your thumb and press into it, it's ready to go. Like this one is still quite hard. Like I'm giving it a lot of oomph.
Yeah.
All right. And then that one, yeah. So pull that out and start kneading it. You can knead this by hand, just, you know, with some brute force. It can be done. And the warmer it is in the room, the softer it stays, which can be difficult in July. So in July, we actually have to keep this room nice and cold in order to keep it from literally stretching in our hands. Yeah. And if you have hot hands, it's going to knead up really fast.
My hands are always really cold.
I like that it's microwavable. So if you wanted to add color, you pop it in the microwave, get it a little bit squishy, and then work your color in. If you've ever tried to put color into satin ice, white satin ice, oh my gosh, it takes forever. It's like forever of kneading. But the Fondarific, because you can pop it in the microwave, warm it up, make it squishy, you can add your color to it. All right, so same process. We're going to knead it until it's smooth, because they're never smooth right out of the package. So if I'm doing carved cakes that have a lot of shape, they've got a lot of nooks and crannies, Fondarific is my go-to.
Okay.
Because I can push it, like I can roll it a little bit thicker and then push it down into those crevices and spread it around the bumps and lumps. I did a fox earlier in the summer, and I used the orange Fondarific for pretty much the whole thing. It is a little bit stickier, so it does take a little bit of cornstarch.
Do you use a special fabric for this?
Just nylons. Anything with a really fine mesh. This one tastes good and smells good. So I've rolled this pretty thin, just so I can show what happens when you roll it thin. It's going to stretch a little too much, and it's going to probably try to break on the outside edges. So you want to keep yours just a little bit thicker than the normal 1/4 inch. A little bit more piping gel for adherence. Just enough to make that sticky. And then place your fondant. Same rules apply. You would end up opening up your skirt and then pressing there. Opening up your skirt and pressing. And it's an upward fluid motion. It's got a lot of stretch, and I can feel it stretching. It actually has a lot of stretch and a lot of give. So like I can stretch this really thin and before it breaks. I can just keep stretching it out, and then finally we break through. So whatever's in it, and I secretly think it might be modeling chocolate, gives it more elasticity than I'm used to seeing in standard fondants. And it still comes up nice and smooth when you're putting it around your cake. One thing that I found was challenging for beginning decorators is we're used to covering cold cake. This is more elastic when it's warm. As soon as it touches cold cake, it firms up fast. So getting it to smooth and make the little skirt and basically work away this around the cylinder, it's very challenging. So in that case, again, you probably want the experience and practice of going really fast, or put it on a room temperature cake. So we've got a nice smooth surface. Creates a really nice, and something else I love about Fondarific, because again it has that elasticity, I can create edges that look extremely crisp, like super crisp. Cut off my excess over here. Camera angle.
If you were changing it, I thought you forgot to move it.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm going to bring this up to the camera so you can see that line. And if I need to smooth out a wrinkle, I use the warmth of my hands to basically soften it back up, and then I can manipulate that. Or if I'm going around a curve and crevices of a shaped cake, I'll do the same thing. I'll warm it up slightly with my hands first and then press so it gets the extra elasticity. I also like Fondarific for figures. So this is great if you're creating little dogs or animals or cute little things, toppers that go on top of the cake. Fondant is a little more challenging for me because it wants to elephant skin and break. This has the elasticity that I'm looking for to create actual figurines. How's it coming?
I think my skirt's better.
It's good. So that's exactly how I do it. So I pull it and then I stretch it back in. But instead of actually touching here, focus just on making it attach.
Okay.
And then same thing here, just make it, just wiggle it and make it attach and then come up with it. So for me, Fondarific is probably always going to be my favorite brand of fondant because of that modeling chocolate similarity. For a while, I used to cover my cakes in modeling chocolate, but two issues with that. One, it's really expensive, and it's when it gets cold, it's really hard to cut into. Modeling chocolate's a little bit tough.
So is this the point where I cut it? Or
Yeah, so I would get up all the excess. But you see how with that elasticity, you had more time to work that skirt.
I like that.
Just keep in mind with that elasticity, if your cake is cold, it hardens faster, so you run out of the ability to stretch it. Nice. It's better. It really is.
It is.
And you can still make the scunch, I think it's called scunch. I don't know what it's called.
Yeah.
You can make the paste and fill in the holes. So you can still work with that. And it's nice and thin, so people aren't getting tons of fondant. Nice job.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The next one I want to do is actually a Renshaw quality, and we won't have time to cover a cake with it, but it's going to be a happy medium between Satin Ice and like Fondarific. So it has a little more stretchability. So here's one just to pull out of the package and feel. Thank you, Renshaw, for samples. So this one definitely feels a little more like Satin Ice to me.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit firmer.
Yes.
And as with all fondants, we have to really work it. This one I'm having to work. I'm having to work to get it to go back to elasticity. So basically what we're doing is just as if you were working the gluten to make bread, we are working the gums and the stretch in this fondant to make it elastic and smooth. I don't bet we have enough here to do a little like side.
Yes.
At least see how it goes over the edges. Got a few little crunchies on this guy, but again, he's a sample, so. All right, I'm going to take my Fondarific off. I really don't want to because I think that's one of the best edges I think I've ever had.
How do you not like crush your cake when you're doing that?
Fondant.
Yeah, when you're making the edge.
Cold cake. And that's where the struggle begins. So cold cake means this doesn't move as much, but you need cold cake to keep crisp edge. But this tool helps because you're really not putting a lot of pressure. You're just forcing the two planes into what looks like a super crisp corner. So this guy made that much easier. I actually have put a lot more pressure using this than I did this one. No yawning, no yawning. So my edges do feel like this feels drier, more like Satin Ice. And I've definitely heard people love to use this for display cakes because it dries nice and hard, gives you nice hard shell.
Can you still do designs on this one, or is the other one?
No, I think once this starts drying, you're not going to be able to manipulate it. But it seems to have a little more elasticity than the Satin Ice did. So I'm able to roll this really thin. This is like 1/8 of an inch. And if I apply it to just an edge, see how it looks. So I'm forcing it to stretch down because that's what we tend to do. I just want to see how it reacts around that edge, and it did really well. It has enough stretch that it didn't elephant skin or break across that top edge. It actually held on, and I don't even have any little minor cracks. So part of the reason I wanted to use red is because I can see all those little flaws and details. No cracks at all. And if I lift to skirt, there's not much ability to skirt. So you're going to find it a little more challenging on the skinnier, smaller cakes than you will on the large cakes. But so far, I'm impressed. And if I use my cool little angle tool, nice crisp edges. I have a little bit of cracking now, but still not quite as much as I did with the Satin Ice. And this one is not going to be affected by the cold. So I would consider this a really great beginner fondant.
Okay.
I'm going to set this aside and let it dry just a little bit. Totally digging this tool. The cool little tool, we should. My cool little edger. I will say the red is highly pigmented. I've been caught red-handed. I do too. So I really do like the Renshaw. So I know the cost may be just a little bit more than Satin Ice, but it seemed more forgiving.
Yeah.
So if I were new at this, I think I would rather work with this than to fuss with the other one. But if you are an advanced decorator and your goal is just to cover styrofoams, then Satin Ice is the perfect budget conscious option for that. And then Fondarific, like I said, I love it because it gives me more workability and I'm able to sit there and dig into the cake, go into crevices, and make it truly 3D without necessarily losing its elasticity. But I have to do that on a cake that's not cold, or I have to wait for it to warm up a little bit to move. All right, I have one more that I really want to try. And it is the new DecoPac pre-sheeted. Oh my gosh. I may never go back to rolling my own fondant. And Renshaw also has a wonderful pre-sheeted option. DecoPac's pre-sheeted comes in 3 packs. And depending on what size you need, we have sizes that cover 6s, 8 to 9, and then 10 to potentially 12. So if you bought a box of a 12, you would have enough fondant discs to cover a 6, a 9, and a 12 potentially, or at the very least a 6, 8, 10. So that's one thing I love. So box of 3. I think this is going to revolutionize things for us. From this point on, we're like, I'm not rolling fondant. Comes in this excellent package. With a zip seal on the inside, and it's a strong zip seal. I'm actually having trouble getting it to release, so good stuff. So pre-cut, pre-sheeted, already round. Pretty much all you need now is like a marker in the middle to center it on your cake. There's your disc. The discs actually have 2 pieces of plastic, front and back. And I can feel that it's pliable, which makes me excited. And I'm going to put just a little bit more piping gel on my cake to make sure I can get it to stick well. One thing I failed to mention, Renshaw tastes really nice. So it does not have that Play-Doh-esque smell or flavor. All right, so back to this. So we've got plastic on 2 sides, here and here. And sandwiched in the middle is a pre-sheeted piece of fondant. We're going to take our top off. It's so pretty. And then you can choose to unwrap it before you attempt to put it on your cake completely. And I think that's what I'm going to do. That's probably what I would do in real practice, is I would put a little bit of cornstarch on my surface, flip it over, and then use my thumb to hold down. I can imagine I would dent my cake if I were trying to release this plastic. Use the back half of my hand to hold down the fondant and just gently peel it till it comes loose. And then pick that up. Make sure you don't have too much cornstarch to prevent it from and this is just enough to cover a 6-inch round. A standard 6-inch round that's 4 inches tall. No more. I feel like I need to heat it up to get it to stretch. Yeah. It's a little bit more firm than what I'm used to. So I'm going to use my hands right here on the skirt. I'm going to hold on to it and warm it up. Okay. And now I can move it. So what wouldn't stretch a while ago is definitely warming up. I now have a lip edge that was not there a couple of minutes ago. So it has some stretch and some give. I'm flipping out my skirt and using my hand to bring it back in. So basically what I'm doing is I'm stretching this area right here. I can feel it getting a little bit thin on the top edge. And I can also tell I haven't put enough piping gel on my styrofoam. So I have to admit I'm struggling with this one. I thought this was going to be much easier for me. But I'm having trouble getting the wrinkles to work their way out. It's almost like I want to roll it and soften it with my hands first. It's also very sticky. Are you noticing that?
Yes.
So whatever tools you use on it, you definitely want to use lots of cornstarch. But it's slowly working. I just keep pulling the skirt, keep pulling the skirt until I get most of the wrinkles worked out to the bottom. And this technique, you're doing great. Like, I can feel you're getting that skirt. I'm just gonna swap over camera angle because you're doing 10 times better than I am with this guy. So there's definitely enough fondant thickness to be able to stretch that skirt. And I see your technique now. I'm totally following it. So you're actually pulling on it a little bit more, pulling it here and forcing it back up against the cake. So basically we were pushing those wrinkles out that bottom. And there's enough give. I have one little tear up here, but I can fix that. There's enough give down here, there's enough stretch to be able to get it to de-wrinkleify. Just takes practice. And it's a slightly different slightly different pull. I'm going to start on the top for smoothing. And then focus on adhering it to this corner, this top edge, so it doesn't pull down anymore before I go down into the rest. And again, this fondant has enough stretch that the majority of my wrinkles came out, and I have no doubt that I can work out the rest of them with some patience, which I have very little of. And I would use a little bit of sponge or whatever we call it, that paste right in there to glue that in.
So how do I do this part again? I just go upward?
For yours, it's actually more of a round. So
okay.
yeah, if you were doing the, that is fantastic. Great job.
Thank you. Better than the first one.
That's how it works. Every time you practice, you get a little bit more. So definitely beginner friendly. It's already pre-rolled out. I love that. It had a lot more stretch than I expected. Yay. So I did end up with plenty. I could have covered a 6-inch tall. I have so much red dye on my hands that it's actually coming up on the paste.
What is this one called?
This is DecoPac's pre-sheeted fondant, which I'm liking the effect a lot.
Is it the same colors?
And no, it's all white right now.
Okay.
It's brand new, so maybe. It's brand new. I'm so excited about it.
Really?
Like when I saw my friend Patty sent me a little text and said, "Have you seen this?" I'm like, "No, must have it, must have it." So yeah, those are the fondants that we carry. In addition to the pre-sheeted fondant, I have the Renshaw, which is essentially the same thing, but it's rolled instead of a flat disc.
Okay.
And it will cover a, let's see, I want to say an 8, 6 and 8. So it might be a little bit short to cover a 10-inch cake. Any comments on fondant covering?
Oh my god, I just got to remember the skirt.
The skirt, work that skirt. Nice job.
Thank you.
All right. So that concludes our live broadcast. So you can find this on YouTube if you want to go back to it.
Okay, perfect.
And then we'll do an edited version at some point that's a little less, a little more abbreviated.
Yeah.
And we covered, what all did we cover? Oh my gosh. So we started with Wilton, yep, and it was nice. We did Satin ice. Had a little bit of elephant skinning, but not too bad. Then we moved to Fondarific, and then Renshaw, and then we did the fun DecoPac. Did I miss anything? All right. It was a bunch. All right. Thanks, guys, and join us next time. Nice job.